Hello and welcome to another episode of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. So, as I mentioned last week, this is something that's a little different to usual. It's a bit more of an in-depth study of what 60s music really is, what that attitude of recording and the approach really is. And we kind of drill down into that a little bit more in this episode, as well as some of the songwriting, and which I mention it in the episode. That isn't my wheelhouse, but it's something I'm certainly interested in. So we'll just dive straight in. Here's more from my conversation with Andy Moorhouse, aka Friends of Norman Havelock. I think there's not only do the musicians have to be, really high quality to achieve that, but there has to be a certain amount of letting things go on your part, I suppose. Was there? I mean, obviously they're going to play fairly well. Part of getting great musicians in is they play fairly accurately to what you want in the first place, because that's their job, is essentially is interpreting what you're after. But at the same time, if you've got time constraints, there is inevitably going to be some things that you go, oh, that wasn't quite what I was expecting, but I'm really into that actually. Let's keep it.
Yeah, I think there was. I think both those things are right. I think there were, because the demos were quite clear and the sort of the creative brief about each song. This is the Wall of Sound, Phil Spector type song from 1962. That's so you immediately think of Hal Blaine, for instance, all those other great sort of wrecking crew musicians and that sort of thing. So people understood that. I think they instinctively understood what was after. So the demos and the charts gave it the rock. Yeah, this is 90% of what it is. But there was then obviously freedom to extrapolate things and go beyond, and to use their enormous knowledge and skill of the motifs and the stylistic little hints and forms that would be absolutely period correct and the right thing to play. And so it's a joy when that comes out and you hear that development of the concept, if you like, that gets a really great player will take it beyond your framework and make it special, and that's what they all did.
Yeah. Something else that sort of piqued my interest is I'm reading a book at the moment about one of the engineers that works with Joe Meek, and a lot of Joe Meek's sessions in the 50s particularly were just done in bedrooms and living rooms of flats and things. And Ralph has so you recorded this at the Bunker at Ralph's studio.
Yeah, the rhythm sections we did, and then vocals and percussion and various overdubs were at Brighton Road Recording Studios in Brighton. Strings were in Prague, the horns in Twickenham. But yeah, basically and mix through Ralph's place. Yeah.
So I mean, it is a proper studio in inverted commas, with a tracking room and a sort of listening a control room.
Yes,
but it's still a very intimate little environment, and that's kind of one of the things that I quite like about it. It's one aspect of sort of 60s music is Abbey Road and this huge room and big productions, and another aspect of it is small, intimate. It's a garage attached to Ralph's house that got converted into a studio, and it's a very comfortable. You're not in a tight inner city that's been a pain in the ass to drive to. You're in a really comfortable environment that Ralph's created, and that's got to have played a role in adding to the effect that you're trying to get.
I think it absolutely did, and I think one of the things that I would say is, I think some people who've recorded for any period of time will be familiar with the idea that you go into a recording studio to record your numbers, and you spend the first morning on the snare drum sound, and by day 3 you think you might just have got the hi-hat done and what have you. And there can be a really dispiriting, dull process of kind of adding complexity to what, after all, should be a really fun and powerful exercise. Music should be enjoyable to make, to write, to make, to record, etc. Regardless of what the subject matter is, there should be some pleasure that comes out of that. And I think in a lot of recording, that maybe gets wrung out a little bit and it just becomes a bit too mechanical. But I think one of the great things about Ralph's place is that, well, he's got his scratch kit in there, he's got the right mics, etc., all the rest of it. The drum kit's in tune. You walk in there, he plays the drums, he press record on the machine, you record it. So you just go in, all the, if you like, the noise and paraphernalia around recording was actually removed. It was just, it's all set up, it all sounds good because we've done that before and we know how to make this kit sound right. And that's basically to record it as it is, as the, you know, a properly maintained, properly built, maintained, tuned kit, etc. There's an incredible grand piano in there. There's various amps and things. There was very little of what you might call engineering in the sense of getting a sound, if you like, and spending a lot of time getting a sound. No, the sound is already there. It's already in the room. So let's just get the players in and they will bring the sound out. And that's exactly what happened. And again, I think that's a very old-fashioned idea, that you're going to focus on the performance and the playing. And then, yes, you're going to revisit the sound when you get to mix it and so on, and you're going to refine things, and that's normal, and you'd expect to do that. But at the moment of it, actually, the primary moment where you're recording it, it's actually, no, we don't need to do any of that. Let's focus on the performance and let's get these amazing players and capture what they do. And that made it very special, I think.
I'm just sort of digesting it all as you're talking, and I'm thinking, you know, back through the 60s, that whole sort of kind of feel was achieved because, I guess, because of time constraints. You know, studios were expensive, and they involved a lot of white coats in the case of Abbey Road. Yeah. And, you know, you'd go in and you'd have your 3-hour session booked. You got what you got. And, you know, you had to be very quick. You know, whether that was, you know, sort of the engineers working on it didn't know what we now know about certain mic placements and things. So they just put the mics in the prescripted places where that mic goes. So there wasn't really any creative thought about it necessarily until, say, Jeff Emmerich came along. You know, you put your microphone where it needs to be. You do your recording, and you get the result in that quick time. And kind of it happened because it was necessary for it to happen that way. And now we have the opposite of that. We've got the world's our oyster in terms of recording. So you've got to force that to happen in a sense. Force is a horrible word to have used because it sounds like it's, you know, it's like making it happen in a really sort of forceful manner. But you have to create the right situation for that to happen, and actually putting time constraints on it all, and finding a space like Ralph's space where it's very comfortable and it's all the things you've just described. You kind of created that right environment, and I'm sure that's something that you were aware of when you were doing it, but it's also just probably something that in the process has happened on its own, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. But I think I'm a great believer in these constraints. I think constraints, you need something to kick against and push off against in order to, you know, launch and make proper progress. And if somebody said, well, here's £300,000 for the budget, spend a year doing it, there are no limits on what you can do. I think that tends to get into a self-serving, indulgent type of thing rather than a very focused idea of what you're trying to achieve. Because I think and you can see when, as technology developed, I mean, there were only a few records really in the late 60s that were on 8-track even, I mean, it took the 70s, it suddenly went to 24-track pretty quickly. And then suddenly that, you've been 5 years earlier, you were on 4-track and now you're on 24-track. That's a world of difference. And that technology then determines how you relate to the technology, doesn't it? And it opens up possibilities. And there's nothing wrong with possibilities, but the kid in the sweet shop does not always get a better deal or better experience than the kid who knows exactly what they want to buy from the sweet shop, and they go in and get it, and they maybe enjoy it more rather than having the tyranny of endless choice, which is difficult to manage. And so I'm a great fan of actually saying, no, these are the parameters. We're going to spend this much time on it. We're going to know clearly what we're trying to achieve, clear vision. We all understand that, and we're going to work toward that goal. I think that's something that is not hugely prevalent now. I think in terms of how music is made now, as a general statement. Obviously, there are many artists who would say, no, that's exactly what I do. But that sort of thing, having constraints, having limitations, having barriers, etc., to overcome, I think kind of makes it harder and makes you be more creative and more inventive, overcoming that, than being given endless money, endless time, and come out when you're ready, which is not too productive.
I don't think so. It's not my usual wheelhouse, but I'm quite interested in your songwriting process with this, because you've written a song for each year of the 60s, and I mean, did you? I can hear some influences in some of the songs, and you can hear my interpretation of what I think you were doing. But I'm just like, for each song, did you have something you were basing it on musically, or lyrically? Were you looking at what happened that year? I mean, how did it all, when you sat down to go, right, 1963, how did that work for you?
Yeah, so I think what I decided early on was I wasn't going to do a standard narrative of the 1960s. One thing you could do is say, okay, 1960, well, we've got the Lady Chatterley's Lover obscenity trial, then we've got, you go through the 60s, you then got the Cuban Missile Crisis, you've got the assassination of JFK, you've got Beatlemania, you've got swinging London, you've got the civil rights movement, you've got women's liberation, you've got hippiedom, you've got maybe Vietnam, and then you've got the moon landing, something like that. And that's a kind of a standard narrative. It's not the only narrative through the 60s, but a lot of people would recognize that sort of thread. And I sort of decided early on that I wasn't going to sort of pin each song in a rather obvious manner to that. So I really wanted it to be Norman's personal journey through the 60s. And this because I've always had the belief that the 1960s, that we're as we understand them, it comes across like everybody was involved in some crazy happenings and psychedelic goings on and so on. And I think the reality is there were maybe 400 or 500 people in the middle of London who were indeed embarking upon mind-expanding, interesting things with art and culture and all the rest of it. And everyone else was, kind of dragging on from the 50s, if you like, and playing catch-up. And so really thematically, it had to be about Norman and the kind of person he was, and thinking about, well, I think Norman, he probably hung around with Joe Mick. He would have known Ian Stewart, the Stones' offstage keyboard player, who didn't look right to be on stage with the Stones. So he was a nearly man. He was, that kind of, should have got further than he got type figure. But was maybe a little bit self-defeating because he had principles and things and he wasn't going to compromise. And so when you got that sort of, you start thinking about the character, and then you start thinking about each year. Well, 1963, for instance, I think, 1963, you could say, well, Please Please Me was probably the biggest thing in 1963, but there was a lot of other stuff going on, and quite a lot of the other stuff was things like Bacharach David type compositions, Dusty Springfield. There was the I often think about John Barry's work and things like that in terms of Bond themes. From Russia with Love, the first Bond theme in '63. That you can develop those ideas, and you get this idea of orchestral pop, if you like, where there really are big orchestras with a rhythm section and maybe some quite choral backing vocals and things. So we're starting to think about those kind of big production numbers, if you like, and look to kind of, I've been a Burt Bacharach fan for as long as I can remember. And so, just think about, well, what would it look like in 1963 if Norman was looking at Burt Bacharach, looking at John Barry, looking at these sorts of things, what might he come up with? And the knowledge tree is my sort of homage to that period. So it's not linked specifically in a sort of really heavy-handed way to each year. It's just thinking about stylistically. The next year, 1964, well, it's a kind of a mod. You would recognize it from the Who or something like that. It's much more, but it's Norman's, a slightly chaotic weekend in Brighton and the bank holiday in May 1964 that doesn't go according to plan. So it's not specifically about mods fighting rockers on the beach on Brighton seafront, but it's about, imagine you were taking a trip down and your brother, borrowed your brother's car and went down to the seaside in search of some company, then what might befall you, and obviously it doesn't go quite right for Norman, but that's how I kind of approached it. And then you go through each year, you might find in slightly more psychedelic times, you might find things getting a bit rockier, a bit where the Stones start using open G tuning and things that causes a shockwave in rock history, really, because that sound is kind of unique and set a whole strand of rock music in motion, I think, at that point. And then you can get into much more lyrical sort of folky type vibes, and you can end up in a kind of country rock ballad, really. So it's looking at the feel for the records that I would know from growing up and the kinds of things, and then thinking, if I've got working on a theme, okay, that's triggering certain sounds and influences of certain songs. Right, okay, that's a way that I could take these chords or this melody, and then I could put it through that filter, if you like, and start developing it in that way, and that would inform the arrangement and the style from that.
Interesting. It's kind of nice hearing the sort of Burt Bacharach and John Barry influences. It's very cinematic at times, and the strings particularly, that's something you don't hear on a lot of records these days. And the strings are incredible. They're just such a standout thing on the record. They're a standout sound. And I think a lot of people perhaps who listen to this podcast, including me, when I sit in the car, I'm putting on Kinks records or Beatles records or whatever, and this isn't that, but it's still got everything that we want from a 60s sounding record there. And it's an alternative view that doesn't get spoken about very often, because people like the Beatles and the Stones take over, and that kind of rough and ready side of things get spoken about a bit more. So I was really surprised when I sat down to really listen to it in depth and thought, actually, this is a side of sort of the 60s scene that I am excited about listening to this.
Well, that's great to hear. And I think, if you could delve into the Burt Bacharach songbook, and obviously there are a lot of artists have played him and Hal David's songs, and they can be arranged in very, very different ways. But I think once you discover this, they don't let go. They're incredible songs, but the arrangements, and you get to Arif Mardin or other people might arrange these songs and produce them in very interesting ways. Might make them a little bit more R&B, or I think the obvious one I think of is I Say a Little Prayer, the Aretha Franklin song. Where if you listen to the Dionne Warwick original, the Burt Bacharach one, it's a lovely song, but it's transformed by the sort of Jerry Wexler production, and given a much harder R&B feel that takes the song in a new direction. I think when Aretha Franklin does it, and because the songs are absolute, gold, that they're very malleable, and they can be, adapted in all sorts of ways. And I think there's a whole thing around 60s orchestral pop that is a really interesting avenue to look at, and I think you're right, it kind of gets a little bit overlooked in favor of Beatles, Stones, Kinks, Who type, the rock side of pop music that developed, and of course that is incredibly powerful and influential in its own way too, but there are other colors at play, I think, and that's part of the record, is that there are stylistic things that were often quite short-lived and what have you, and maybe didn't have the legs that some of the other styles did have, but that doesn't diminish them in any way. And hopefully we've managed to capture some.
So what's the record's coming out this coming week, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes,
and you're releasing on 12-inch. And where can people find out about?
Yeah, so it's on, as you can imagine, all the digital platforms, on Spotify and Apple Music and Deezer and Tidal and all those that people would know. It's on with diggersfactory.com, which is a French label in terms of vinyl release, which I'm very excited about, because most of all I'm looking forward to hearing it on vinyl, to have the proper old school experience. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's on Bandcamp as well, if that's your thing and you want to listen to it in that way. So it's available. I haven't quite got around to cassettes yet, but if anyone wants to email me and say I like it on cassette, I'll put it on cassette. I'll handwrite it for you. But so it's on most formats.
And then is this a start of Norman's journey? Are we going to hear more of Norman?
Yeah, it is. I think that, I've enjoyed it a lot. I did it because I wanted to do it, and I've been blown away with how it's turned out, because some of the generosity and the artistry of the people involved who've contributed to it. So yes, I'd like to do more. At some stage, if there's demand to do some live things as well, would be great. So I'm working on the second LP now, just at the writing stage. So I would hope to get that written and demoed up by the summer, and then we can go from there, really. But you haven't heard the last of Norman. He's I like to just develop him. Where would he go? What would he do? What would he think? What would Norman do? That's the question.
It's such a cool idea, and it's such a common theme from the 60s, where you get these writers who, like Ron, apart from a very sort of niche, I'm talking about Ron Ryan here, but that very niche kind of clique of people in the world don't know who he is. And, it's not an uncommon story to find a writer that kind of, did a few bits, missed out on some royalties due to trusting people too much, and now they just live a normal life. And sadly that's a really common narrative. So
it is common.
Yeah, and what you've hit on with this idea is, I think, it's unusual, and it makes you stand back and go, "Ooh, really?" And then you look into it and you go, "I love this. I really love this."
You're very kind, Joe.
No, but that's it. But that's the truth of it, isn't it? It's a very odd experience. What you've created is different, and you've kind of, it is, you do have to spend a minute looking at it, and then when you buy into it, it's such a fantastic idea.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind. I think I'm quite interested by creating worlds, if you like. And I think, often you might see novelists who are kind of known for this. So if you're a novelist who writes dystopian fantasies like, The Handmaid's Tale or something like that, or, Never Let Me Go, Ishiguro, or even J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, you're creating a world, and it's a kind of holistic value system, etc., that people can understand. It all interlocks and works with precision, so it all kind of makes sense. And I think that idea hasn't really come across to music that in too much. So it's a way of looking at an artistic expression through a kind of an imaginary world, really. And do you want to join? And is it because you think Norman experienced these things, or is he a Walter Mitty character who sat in his bedroom in Maidstone and never really got beyond it because of crippling shyness? Or what is it? You decide, or did he actually end up in Laurel Canyon writing this folky, dreamy harmony tune on a 12-string Rickenbacker? So it's for you to decide, and that's the key thing. Once it's out in the public domain, the audience decides how it is, really, and that's the joy.
Well, I'll link to everything in the podcast notes, I will press people to go and listen to it in my outro as well as right now. But yeah, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me on your podcast. And I would like to say, the podcast is terrific. And for instance, I came across rare tone mastering through your podcast because you interviewed Ben Pike a few months back, and I thought he's the guy I'd like to master the record. So this kind of community that you've got going here it really works. People talk to each other and share, and it's great. So I really appreciate you inviting me on, and thank you.
Pleasure, and thanks for that. I mean, that's what I set out to do with this is to find a group of like-minded people, and little did I know that there's a heck of a lot of like-minded people out there. Yeah. So, and I'm really pleased it's kind of grown into a community that doesn't involve me necessarily. Everybody's off doing their own things with each other. And that's great.
Really exciting.
So,
Thank you, Joe.
So there we have it, my conversation with Andy Moorhouse, aka friend of Norman Havelock. I would encourage you to go and check that album out. It really is special. It's a very cool thing that Andy's created. The way it was conceived and thought about, and the way it's the sort of approach to recording and everything about it is very, very special. So do go and give it a listen, especially in light of this conversation. So that just leaves me to say a big thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with me, for any reason, episode suggestions, I don't know what else you'd want to email me about. The sessions I do on my website or anything like that, you can visit my website, which is allyouneedisdrums.com, and you can see there's all the drum stems and things I do up there. Also, you can get in touch. My email is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. Bloomin' heck, my patter this evening is absolutely atrocious. I think I'm quite tired. But I'm going to leave it in because I'm not recording this. Believe it or not, this is the second time I've recorded this outro. And I just need to go and go to bed, I think. Anyway, I'm going to stop waffling. That just leaves me to say a big thank you to Joe Kane for the intro and outro music, to Adam Mallet for the artwork, and to Rory Hancock for editing the podcast and uploading it. And a huge thank you to you for listening. And I will be back next week with another episode. I am tired. Goodbye.